By 1967, producer Tomoyuki Tanaka had officially run out of ideas. At this point in time, Godzilla had fought King Kong, went to space, and had a kid. What more could you really do from here? So it was decided that the upcoming 9th film in the Godzilla franchise would be its last. The idea was to bring back every single monster that was ever in a Toho Kaiju movie for one big last hurrah. Everyone from Mothra to Rodan to Godzilla to King Kong, and even the Gargantuas and Maguma The Giant Walrus would have made an appearance. The very first draft of the script was titled Monster Total Advancement Order, and it would have featured a plethora of monsters. Eventually, though, the cast of monsters were cut down, with Kong, the Gargantuas, Maguma, and Ebirah getting removed. Director Ishiro Honda proposed a bunch of wild ideas, like hybrid monsters created from spliced DNA, but these ideas were nixed because of budget constraints. And speaking of, every monster but Godzilla and Anguirus were brought to life using old pre-existing suits. As a result, Varan and Baragon look really rough around the edges, while Ghidorah looks really scuffed in certain shots. The film would eventually be retitled to Monster Total Advancement, but was released in America as Destroy All Monsters. It's a favorite among Godzilla fans for its jam-packed kaiju roster and the climactic final battle where all the monsters team up to fight King Ghidorah one last time. However, I find it to be a very flawed but entertaining movie.
Boo this man!
These flaws tend to get overlooked by fans for its kaiju action, and while there's nothing wrong with liking this movie, I do need to be honest and be completely transparent with these retrospectives. So, without wasting any more time, this is Destroy All Monsters. At the end of the 20th century, Earth's kaiju are confined to Monsterland, where they're kept under tight control. The world is experiencing peace, but this peace is shattered when communications are mysteriously cut, and the monsters suddenly attack major world cities. Godzilla strikes New York, Rodan targets Moscow, Mothra ravages Beijing, and Gorosaurus destroys Paris. The chaos is revealed to be orchestrated by the Kilax, a race of alien women who have taken control of the monsters and demand Earth's surrender. Captain Yamabe and his spaceship crew uncover the Kilax mind control technology, first hidden on Earth and later relocated to a base on the moon. After a desperate battle, the humans destroy the moon base, freeing the kaiju from alien control. In retaliation, the Kilax summon King Ghidorah, their ultimate weapon, to defend their stronghold at Mount Fuji. Ghidorah faces off against a united force of Earth's monsters, including Mothra, Godzilla, Rodan, Anguirus, and others. In a climactic battle, the Earth monsters overwhelm and kill Ghidorah. As a final gambit, the Kilax unleash the Fire Dragon, which begins torching Tokyo. Godzilla destroys their underground base, while Captain Yamabe's team destroys the Fire Dragon, revealed to be nothing more than a flaming alien saucer. With the Kilax defeated, the kaiju return to Monsterland, bringing peace once more. Destroy All Monsters is a beloved kaiju classic, and it's the film equivalent of a greatest hits album for the entire Godzilla franchise up until this point. But let's not act like it's some untouchable masterpiece. As much as I want to love it unconditionally, giant monsters destroying cities is kind of my thing, the movie shoots itself in the foot by putting way too much emphasis on the humans and their utterly boring storyline. Godzilla movies tend to have this reputation where the human plot lines are regarded as terrible and boring, that there isn't enough kaiju action. While I do think that this critique is vastly over-exaggerated in a lot of cases, the human plotline in Destroy All Monsters is just bad. Like, impressively bad. Captain Yamabe and the Moonlight SY-3 crew are supposed to be the heroes here, but they are so devoid of personality that you could replace them with cardboard cutouts, and I doubt anyone would really even notice. They spend way too much time standing in rooms trying to figure out what's happening while the audience is just screaming at the television screen saying, "We already know, it's the aliens controlling the monsters." The UNSC stuff is just a lot of exposition disguised as dialogue. By the time they're explaining how they'll deal with the Kilax or Kilax, for like the third time, you realize you've just mentally checked out. I'm going to say Kilax, by the way. I know that some might say Kilax. The dub that I have, they say Kilax. I'm saying Kilax. Speaking of, by the way, the Kilax are supposed to be the big bads of the movie, but they are about as threatening as a porg. They have no personality, no charm, and no real plan beyond the generic take over the world shtick. Compare this to the Exilians from Invasion of the Astro Monster. They were creepy, manipulative, and they actually felt like a credible threat. The Kilax just show up, monologue about world domination, and then get obliterated. That's it. Their entire existence feels like an afterthought, a way to glue the monster battles together without putting in much effort. And that kind of brings us to the real issue I have with this movie. Why is there so much emphasis on the humans and the aliens when this is supposed to be a kaiju movie? The title is Destroy All Monsters, not listen to boring people talk about aliens. There are stretches of the film where the monsters are just off-screen doing who knows what, while we're stuck watching Moonlight SY3 fly back and forth. When the kaiju do show up, it is electric. Godzilla thrashing around New York City with Manda, Rodan swooping over Moscow, and Gorosaurus pulling a Jurassic Park moment in Paris. But it feels like the movie is actively trying to keep those moments from happening too often, as if the filmmakers forgot why people showed up in the first place. And look, I get it, the human element is supposed to ground the story and give us a lens through which to view the action. It's also there to pad out the runtime a bit, because I know that making a feature-length kaiju movie on a tight budget is hard. Trust me, I know from experience, but when the humans are this bland, it just feels like wasted time. Every scene with the UNSC or the Kilax is a missed opportunity for more monster mayhem. You have Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, and a dozen other kaiju in the same movie, and you are spending the vast majority of the runtime on forgettable humans and undercooked aliens. Come on, guys. To be fair though, that climactic battle with King Ghidorah near Mount Fuji is everything that a Godzilla fan would ever want. Chaotic, thrilling, and downright brutal. Watching the Earth's monsters team up to take him down is the kind of spectacle that reminds you why kaiju films even exist in the first place. But even then, I still have some issues with this battle. For starters, there's almost no tension. We're seeing 10 monsters just jump Ghidorah, like it's nowhere near a fair fight. Maybe if we saw Ghidorah slaughter half the cast, it would have been a lot more interesting, but this is just a borderline comedic beatdown. Not to mention, while there are technically 10 monsters going up against Ghidorah, it's really just Godzilla, Rodan, Mothra, Anguirus, Kamanga, and Gorosaurus fighting, while Minya, Manda, Varan, and Baragon just sort of watch from the cuck chair. It's somewhat disappointing, especially if you are a fan of those specific monsters. Granted, a lot of the monsters that were sidelined just could not participate in the fight for logistical reasons, seeing as their suits were just wrecked beyond belief. But it feels like borderline false advertising. And if you want to get even more nitpicky, why is it called Destroy All Monsters, but only King Ghidorah gets destroyed? Okay, well, that's not a real critique, I promise. I'm fucking around. Getting a bit more serious, though, the themes presented in this film are extremely half-baked. Ishiro Honda usually tries his best to include some level of social commentary in his films, regardless of how goofy the tone is. In Destroy All Monsters, you could tell Honda was trying to go for this idea of critiquing the fragility of global unity, suggesting that true cooperation only arises in the face of overwhelming existential threats. The kaiju attacks are deliberately scattered across world capitals, spreading chaos that transcends national boundaries. It's only through the unified efforts of UNSC, Captain Yamabe's team, and the monsters themselves that humanity can ultimately defeat the Kilax. The climactic battle at Mount Fuji is a visual metaphor for this very theme, as Earth's monsters rally together to destroy King Ghidorah, a symbol of external domination. This theme aligns really well with the Cold Era concerns about global division and the need for collective action. The Monster Alliance serves as an exaggerated but very effective analogy for what's possible when disparate forces, natural, human, and otherwise, unite against a common enemy. The fact that it takes an alien invasion and near total destruction to achieve cooperation reflects a cynical view of humanity's reluctance to act unless the stakes are dire. Even then, this idea is very muddled, and not as fleshed out as it maybe should be. Despite the film spending so much time on the humans, we never really get any sense of world building or a better understanding of the futuristic year of 1999. I think there's a great deal of potential for a movie like this. Imagine a Godzilla movie with a 1960s retro futurist aesthetic where humans are united against monsters, with the full knowledge needed to contain these destructive forces of nature. Apparently, Ishiro Honda envisioned this entire subplot where Monsterland actually functioned by having this whole farming system, and that was how the monsters were fed. It makes sense. You would need a ton of food to be able to actually maintain these monsters and keep them alive on this island. As interesting as this sounds, the idea ultimately never made it into the movie, which is rather disappointing. The most we ever see of this concept is Rodan catching a dolphin in the ocean at the very beginning of the movie, but otherwise you're just left wondering, how do they eat? I get this is a movie about giant monsters, but how do they eat? I want to know. Tell me, please, show me. Besides the geopolitics and space travel, there's nothing that really indicates this movie is set in the not-too-distant future of the Showa continuity. Why they didn't take advantage of this setup is beyond me. If I had to guess, budgetary. Regardless, it's missed potential, and in my opinion, the film suffers greatly because of it. Looking at the production side of things, I really appreciate Sadamasa Arikawa's work here as the special effects director. There's a bit of a misconception that Eiji Tsuburaya was the special effects director for Destroy All Monsters, as he is technically credited as being the film's special effects supervisor. However, that's more of a ceremonial title more than anything else. Regardless, Arikawa had previously worked on Ebirah Horror of the Deep and Son of Godzilla. These are movies with very little, if any, city destruction sequences, with the most intricate of the two being the sequence where Godzilla destroys the red bamboo base in the former. I think Destroy All Monsters is Arikawa's way of proving himself, as this film involves extremely complex scenes with all the kaiju attacking various major cities across the globe, as well as that big final battle against Ghidorah. Obviously, I'm not saying that Sadamasa Arikawa was a complete novice who didn't know what he was doing. After all, he worked on countless Godzilla movies to a certain degree, but I think that his work on Destroy All Monsters rightfully puts him at the same level as Tsuburaya. I absolutely adore the scene of Godzilla and Manda laying waste to New York. It's one of the best Godzilla destruction sequences of the entire Showa era, and I just adore it with every fiber of my being. Speaking of Godzilla, this is Haruo Nakajima's 9th time playing Godzilla. It was also his 2nd time playing the monster Baragon, with his first being in 1965's Frankenstein vs. Baragon, or Frankenstein Conquers the World. As always, you can just tell that this is Nakajima donning the Godzilla suit, and I mean that in the best way possible. He just has so much character, and it makes the character of Godzilla just so much more interesting to watch on screen. A lot of his arm movements and odd quirks are now synonymous with the character, and it's a nice touch that he now feels more mellow given the events of Son of Godzilla. One surprising highlight of the film is Gorosaurus. It's kind of bizarre that he's even in this movie since his only other appearance was in 67's King Kong Escapes, but that's not a bad thing by any means. He has a lot to do here, which is surprising since this is the last time he would appear in a mainline Godzilla film if you don't count the stock footage used in Godzilla's Revenge and Godzilla vs. Gigan. Gorosaurus gets to dropkick Ghidorah and sees a lot of action during the final battle. Not to mention, he's the main monster that attacks Paris, despite the English dub calling him Baragon. This is because Baragon's ears kept breaking off during that sequence, so the filmmakers had to replace him with Gorosaurus. I think most Godzilla fans would consider Gorosaurus to be a D-list monster in terms of popularity, so it's cool he actually gets to kick some ass for once. In Destroy All Monsters, he's played by Hiroshi Sakita, who also donned the Anguirus suit as well. Another major highlight is the film's score by Akira Ifukube. Obviously, Ifukube's music is always a win, but he's at his best here. I love the track Moonbase. It has this eerie theremin playing, and this is an instrument that was used by a lot of composers in the 50s and 60s on science fiction movies because of its almost alien sound. However, Ifukube uses it as a motif for the human characters, which makes sense given how humanity has now advanced to the point of using space travel and having a moon base. I just love how it sounds. It's so calming. And in that context, it's a genius creative decision. This is going to be a bit of a weird comparison, but if you've ever ridden Space Mountain at Disney World, there's this really great music that plays while you wait in the queue to board the ride. It's peaceful and almost hopeful science fiction music, and Ifukube's Moonbase score really reminds me of it. Okay, let's talk now about the English dub and the international versions. In 1969, American International Pictures, or AIP, released Destroy All Monsters in America. This version of the film was dubbed in English, and it's okay. Don't get me wrong, the dub does its job, all things considered, but some performances are downright terrible and borderline distracting. The poster for this specific American release has always made me laugh. Like a lot of international Godzilla posters, it isn't exactly representative of the film itself. There's Manda and Rodan in the background with some spaceships. In the foreground, though, we can see a really intimidating Anguirus, a rather frightening Minya, a solid King Ghidorah illustration, and whatever the hell these are supposed to be. I'm fairly certain this is supposed to be Godzilla, Gorosaurus, and Kamanga. If you squint your eyes and tilt your head, you can probably see the resemblance, but I have no idea what this thing is even supposed to be.
Daddy, chill.
What the hell is even that?
Now, the AIP version of Destroy All Monsters was rated G for general audiences, meaning anyone of any age could go and see it in theaters. However, in the UK, Destroy All Monsters was given an X rating, meaning anyone under the age of 16 was banned from seeing the movie. You may be wondering, wow, what additional scenes did they throw in there? Anguirus snorting cocaine? Minya getting decapitated? A kaiju orgy? Well, here's the thing. This version of the film was the AIP version, so they didn't make any changes. This X rating stemmed from the fact that the film was released in the UK as a double feature, with the American crime film Killers 3, starring Dick Clark and Merle Haggard. As a result, the British film censors just said, you know what, X rating for both, who cares? It wasn't until 1992 when the VHS release of Destroy All Monsters would officially be given a PG rating. Like a lot of Godzilla movies, the international releases across the globe were given a million different titles depending on the country and the region. So while almost every American Godzilla fan knows the film as Destroy All Monsters, the actual translated title from Japanese is Monster Total Advancement. I mentioned this before, but I do think it's a more fitting but also less interesting title. Meanwhile, in West Germany, the film was released under the title Frankenstein and the Monsters from Space. I'm not joking. This makes no sense whatsoever, since there's only one monster from space, and that's King Ghidorah. Most glaring of all is the mention of Frankenstein, though. While Baragon is the only kaiju with a connection to Frankenstein, the character obviously doesn't appear at all in the film. In Italy, the movie was released as The Heirs of King Kong, which is funny considering how Kong almost appeared in the film. However, my absolute favorite international title has to be Finland's The Monsters Are Threatening the World, which is so blunt you just have to respect it. At the end of the day, Destroy All Monsters is a movie that gets by on the strength of its kaiju and nothing else. The human plotline is forgettable, the aliens are just laughable, and the monster action is fantastic, but there's not enough of it. I completely understand why so many Godzilla fans adore this movie. Like, trust me, it's okay. You are allowed to like this movie even if I'm not the biggest fan of it. It's by no means the absolute worst of the Showa era, but it's by no means the best either. In spite of all my issues with this film, the finale is just so damn good. If the Godzilla franchise ended here, then this would have been a really solid way to close out the series. However, that just wasn't the case, and the franchise would continue on for decades after the fact. With all of that out of the way, I'm Cole McCormick, you're watching Firewood Media. This is just a small part of my massive Godzilla retrospective project where I review every single Godzilla movie and TV show. I've already talked about the first 3 Godzilla installments in the MonsterVerse, so go check those out as well as some of the Showa ones that I've already covered. Back in October on Halloween, I dropped my 4th feature film. It's called The Anomalous Archives, and it is this analog horror anthology kaiju project that I am just so proud of. If you like Godzilla, then this might be your jam. Consider becoming a member to support the channel. It's kind of like Patreon, but it's right here on YouTube. For just $1.99 a month, you'll receive member shoutouts. So for example, here's all the channel members. Thank you so much. And you also get to see some of my videos early before anyone else does. You also get to be credited as an executive producer in all of my film projects. Yes, really, you get to be in the credits of a movie. You don't have to if you don't want to. It's an extra perk for anyone that wants to support the channel while getting some extra content on the side. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.